Let me start the timer.
Oh, so actually the first speaker is Jennifer, so you're good.
Perfect.
We're good to go. Okay, well, welcome everyone. Welcome to the first session with the theme of language teaching, learning, and assessment. I'm Katie Duffield, and I'm the moderator for the session. We have 3 presentations today. Each presenter will be giving a 12 to 15 minute presentation, and at the end of the session, there will be a 10 to 15 minute Q&A discussion, depending on how much time is left over, really. I will be sending 2 messages to the presenters at 12 and 15 minutes respectively. I'll just put it in the chat to remind you of time. The session, as I mentioned, is being recorded, so we're going to upload it to the website later. I kindly ask the audience to post your questions to the presenters who are here today in the Zoom chat to be addressed at the end, or you can unmute yourself to interact with the presenters during the Q&A discussion. So really, it's whatever you feel comfortable with. Without further ado, let's welcome our first presenter, Jennifer LaCroix from Dr. Jennifer LaCroix from Boston University. The title of the presentation is The Inscrutability of Language Teaching, or of Teaching Listening, as an integrated versus paired skill in second language education.
Great, thanks. And just give me one quick moment here.
Take your time.
Okay, so hi everyone. Thanks for the nice presentation. I'm here today for the first time as a doctor, so thanks for the shout out on that, Katie. I was a doctoral student at Boston University, and for the past 6 years, I have been exploring various forms of second language L2 listening pedagogy via various studies. For this study that I'll be showing you today, I'll be sharing part of the work I did for my dissertation, which was case study methodology. And before I begin, I'd like to start by giving you a little bit of an overview of listening. It's one of the most difficult facets of language to characterize. According to Nation and Newton, it is also the least understood and the most overlooked of the 4 language skills: listening, speaking, reading, and writing in the second language classroom. L2 listening is a source of frustration for adult learners, as it is the skill over which learners feel the least control and the skill which receives the least systematic attention from L2 instructors and course materials. Many researchers in the fields of applied linguistics and language education recognize that listening is an underdeveloped area in L2 practice. Although these researchers have suggested that certain features of a language should be highlighted when learning to listen in an L2, what constitutes an effective listening instructional practice remains an open question. Add to this directionality. There's a heavy focus in current listening materials that incorporate mostly unidirectional listening contexts, according to Graham, Francis, and Brophy, 2014, where listeners are expected to only listen to one person but not respond. Therefore, I'd like to emphasize that unidirectional listening isn't just one kind of listening situation, though at the university level, we'll have different contexts where we need to prioritize what it might look like to have bidirectional involving 2 speakers and multi-directional involving 3+ speakers listening contexts in academic settings. The later being the most challenging for an L2 listener. However, most L2 listening research has prioritized unidirectional listening contexts in their studies that involve post-secondary participants. Further, most existing studies have looked at participants who are both students and share the same L1. Very few have examined perspectives from program leaders and teachers who have multilingual, multicultural language learners in their classes. In addition, in the field of second language acquisition, there are 2 general approaches for conceptualizing L2 listening instruction. The first considers teaching as product-oriented, according to Buck, 2001, Vandergriff and Baker, 2015. Such a view focuses more on learners' performance on formal assessments, such as summative assessments, which aim to measure listening comprehension. In this situation, the teacher may play something like a TED Talk or other audio source, and then ask the students to respond to multiple choice questions or something similar to evaluate students' listening comprehension as an end product. In contrast, many researchers have claimed that product-oriented view only tests listening comprehension, but does not teach listening. Thus, many scholars have proposed thinking about teaching L2 listening as process-oriented. Under this orientation, there's an effort to focus more on the development of L2 listening and less on its assessment for college-age learners. More specifically, a process frame considers cognitive, metacognitive, and sociocultural strategies for learning to listen, along with its various stages of development. The general consensus in the literature is a need for more process and less product, but few studies have examined what L2 listening pedagogy looks like in action. So for this study, I designed a case study at an intensive English program in the northeastern quadrant of the United States, emphasizing case study methodology according to Ginn. The program, which I'll call the University Studies English Program, hereafter USEP, has students from various L1 backgrounds. They represent countries such as Venezuela, China, Colombia, Kazakhstan, Saudi Arabia, Korea, etc. And they share the same goal of attaining full acceptance into a university where English will be used as the medium of instruction, or EMI, a current global trend. According to Dearden, 2016, EMI is a rapidly growing global phenomenon. So I designed this case study to explore through interviews with program leaders and experienced instructors what they consider as key pedagogical challenges and opportunities and L2 listening as the program shifted from integrating the 4 skills, reading, writing, listening, and speaking in one context to a more paired skills focus in a new program where reading and writing combined in one class and listening and speaking were combined in a separate class. I also document through this what participants felt about this program shift. So participants included 2 program leaders. It also included 7 of the listening and speaking instructors. And then separately in the 3rd strand of the case study, I selected 2 of those instructors at the advanced level to do classroom observation, and I conducted 13 classroom observations of roughly 39 hours at the most advanced levels in the program. So on the slide, you can see the data sources and data analysis. I used a combination of thematic analysis for the semi-structured interviews, and then I used open coding for the classroom observations and grounded theory. What I found is that in the case of the, well, these are the 3 research questions that I asked the program leaders. Essentially, I wanted to find out what were the challenges and in the former integrated approach that provided rationale for this significant program level shift. Then I wanted to find out what connections they saw, because for the first time, the program was also requiring both formative and summative assessments. And finally, I wanted to see what they envision in the future. What I found out is that program leaders felt in the previous program, they had wide variation in an integrated skills approach with all skills combined. In the new paired skills, it provided a more focused approach. So in a more focused approach, then what can we learn about the pedagogy? What can we learn about what the teachers have to say? So the program leaders identified that listening was a very valuable skill, but it was not one that they had previously realized was very challenging for instructors to teach and, more importantly, to assess. I think they presumed, because of the communicative language approach, that listening was happening more organically through osmosis, meaning that everyone was having some speaking and discussion time, and therefore that constituted listening practice. In the second perspective of case study, I interviewed the instructors asking these 2 research questions, really essentially trying to probe what their perspectives were and what new opportunities had presented themselves now that they were thinking about listening just paired with speaking as paired with reading, writing, and speaking, which is a lot to manage in one contextual space. So in the new paired skills approach, instructors had new questions and identified new challenges with L2 listening, while in the older program, instructors valued following a topic that used all 4 skills. They were less clear as to how topic-based instruction could work in the new approach, and instructors felt very comfortable teaching and evaluating speaking in both of the integrated and paired skills formats, but were less confident about how to teach and assess listening in the new program. Here in these next 2 slides, you can see 2 of the quotes, and I can upload these slides if you want to take a closer look. But they really liked the integrated approach. They felt like it was an easy way to combine all the skills. They liked having one topic, but they recognize now in the new program that listening is much more complicated and more difficult than they had previously realized. They talked at length in what they do for their before listening practices, but had less to say about what they do during or after listening. Finally, you can see some new conundrums in the paired skills context. They started thinking about listening, and it's very difficult to see. So therefore, how could they really measure it? How could they know how to adjust their pedagogy? And the third perspective of the case study, I conducted observations with this one question. And in this last part of the data collection, when I observed 2 different instructors at the advanced classes, I was trying to document some of the complexities pertaining to this listening L2 pedagogy that both the program leaders and the instructors had described. So this is where things started to get a bit more complicated. According to the learning program, listeners have to be able to track and extract key information from linguistically unadapted college level audiovisual materials on unfamiliar topics of up to 12 to 15 minutes in length. So this is what the learning outcome looks like for the advanced levels that I observed. And what I really determined I needed to do then was, instead of looking at processed product, I had to describe a new framework to describe what I was observing in the classroom. It became too hard for me to determine, what is actually listening? Is it just having a conversation with your partner, or was I looking for something else? And so I looked at this listening term, and I decided to describe a listening experiences. So I wanted to take a look at directionality as well. And I wanted to take a look at adaptation. Were they using adapted sources or not? And in terms of directionality, and that refers to flow of conversation, were they using unidirectional context, bidirectional, and multidirectional, as I had already identified in the literature there was a gap for, and what did that look like in practice? So here are a few quick notes from my observation notes. I found a lot of the time the teachers I observed were focusing on activating prior knowledge, or they were looking at providing procedural directions. At most, they were assessing comprehension at the end, but if they were doing anything with the during listening part, it was very little. It mostly focused on listening for a lexical item. And another class I observed with Judah, you can see some of my notes where he was using textbook video, a unit 3 from a listening textbook. The topic was sociology in a changing world. So I documented again what he did before, during, after, if he stopped audio at any point to do something. So in my discussion, I can say that the interviews with the USEP program leaders revealed that they considered listening an important skill for learner comprehension. Both program leaders in this study, consistent with some L2 research, reported that listening has become an important component of many language programs, but remains problematic insofar as many teachers are uncertain regarding how to develop and assess their students' listening skill, particularly at the advanced level. And Go 2005 had already put this forward. So at the shared instructor interviews, the shift to paired skills highlighted instructors' uncertainty about how to teach listening. Therefore, one question for future research and practice is how instructors might be better supported to teach listening, which is a question that can be asked within the context of an integrated or paired skills approach. So here are their questions and challenges. Participating instructors express concerns regarding L2 listening pedagogy and the paired skills approach. While all spoke highly of using content-based themes or projects to unify their former integrated skills approach, they had many questions about how to use theme or project-based work and a paired skills approach. Some also expressed a concern about knowing how to scaffold authentic, unadapted listening experiences for advanced learners, and all reported challenges with creating both formative and summative listening assessments for learners. So for their part, program leaders reported that they had previously been unaware that listening assessment had been a challenge for instructors, and this may reflect that, quote, listening is probably the least explicit of the 4 language skills, making it the most difficult skill to learn and teach, according to Vandegrift. The covert nature of the process and the ethereal nature of the input make the perceptual and comprehension processes involved in listening difficult to access, facilitate, and assess. So this study found that teachers' experiences for students, that teachers structured different kinds of listening experiences for students, but did not engage in explicit instruction in L2 listening, focusing on specific features of bi and multi-directional spoken language. So I am going to pause right here. And I am going to upload these slides because I can see that I'm already over my time. Sorry about that. So I will upload these, but what I'm proposing is that we have a new descriptive framework for a listening experience. And I propose that we look at listening rather than process and product, because we can see that there's such a heavy emphasis on just what we do before listening, but perhaps we need to consider directionality, adaptation, and before, after, and during practices as part of this listening experience framework. And I also suggest that implications for teaching and future research might take into consideration preparing teachers to have a deeper understanding of listening as a process, and that we perhaps move past the dichotomy between product and process and look at listening as a more complex context, which encourages teachers to conduct their own action research and investigate different strands and threads of this complex language skill. So implication for future research, even though listening is largely unobservable, they can look into this and attempt to understand the influences or success of attempts to understand spoken research, and we can look, or spoken words, and we can also look at how we can best understand listening in order to support teachers and engage students in during listening experiences through more scaffolding. In conclusion, this study contributes to the field's understanding of L2 listening pedagogy opportunities and challenges as explored in one focal program from multiple perspectives. It shines a light on challenges and opportunities at both program and classroom level regarding the complexities involved in L2 listening pedagogy. This study sits within a larger trajectory of inquiry into L2 listening. And through this larger inquiry, I seek to specify the principles and practices of a systematic approach to L2 listening pedagogy and teacher development and university-based intensive programs. Thank you very much. And if you have more questions, this is my website and this is my email.
Thank you so much, Dr. LaCroix. And like I said before, if you do have questions, you can put them in the chat and we can cover them at the end. So thank you so much, Jennifer, for your wonderful presentation. And next, we're going to welcome our next 2 presenters, Kathy Kim and Frances Wenrick, also from Boston University. And the title of the presentation is Language Engagement of International Students, a validation study of the self-directed language exposure log.
Dr. Kim, you have to unmute yourself.
Sorry, can everyone see my screen? Perfect. Let me time myself. Okay, Thank you so much for inviting us to introduce our study about the language engagement of international students. In this study, we are also looking into validating a self-directed language exposure log with the objective measures. We had an overall objective to observe language engagement of international students immersed in a target language environment. And by doing so, we wanted to track the quantity and the type of language used through a self-directed log. And from a measurements perspective, we wanted to see if the questionnaires that the students used to log their language use. So for instance, how much they use English or how much they use their L1 or no languages, if that aligns with the actual use of their language. And one way to do that is to analyze the objective measure through a voice recorded device. So by doing so, we wanted to analyze the subjectivity of self-directed measure. Before we delve into the study, I wanted to first define what a language engagement is in a second language acquisition context. I would like to quote Laupin and Spada, 2006. The language that the learner is exposed to, either written or spoken in the environment, is the language engagement. And here I want to emphasize that linguistic repertoires are shaped by one's experience with the language. So when we talk about language development, in particular second language development, it is very difficult to talk about this without considering the quality and the quantity of LH2 input. So we think it's very important to have a good understanding of how much our international students are actually using the language, especially when they are studying abroad. So I want to briefly touch upon a couple of previous studies that actually looked into the international students' language use. Two studies, Fried et al. 2004, Dewey et al. 2012. What they found in their study is that college students who were studying abroad, and these student population was
Dr. Kim, I think the sound went out. Can anyone else hear, or is it just me? Okay.
Sorry, can everyone hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
So I was saying that in Fried et al. And Dewey et al., what they found was that international students, mostly college students who were exchange students, they reported comparable use of L1 and LH2 usage. Whereas Ranta and Mecklenburg 2013 study, they found that international students, especially the Chinese L2 graduate students who are studying in China, they use L2 way more than the L1. In the type of L2, they reported that they were using receptive skills more than the productive skills. So previous studies have found different findings of exactly how much our international students are using the language and what type of language they're actually using. And when it comes to language engagement, we need to think about the validity of the measurement. So all of the previous studies have used a subjective approach. So they will be providing questionnaires to the students for them to fill out how much they thought they were using the language. So that this could happen either through a retrospective manner. So after a study abroad, they will go back and reflect on how much they were using the language, or on a daily basis manner. That is, every day they will need to fill out a log. But our one big question is, this subjective approach, does this actually align with their actual language engagement? And in order to examine this, we use a device called electronically activated recorder. I'm going to use ear from now on, and this is an objective approach, and Francis later on will be talking a little bit more about this device itself. So this brings to our two research questions. The first research question was, how much language engagement do international students actually have? And what type of language skills do they actually practice the most? And the second question was, to what extent does the data from the subjective language engagement questionnaire, which is the language engagement log, LEL, align with the objective language engagement measure, which is the ear device? So from here on, Francis will introduce the methods.
Hi, so I'm going to start by discussing the participants of this study. So the participants were mostly international students in the United States. Their age ranged from 18 to 49 years old. For our first research question, we had 154 participants, and 122 of these participants were about 27 years old. When considering the native language, or the L1 of our participants, 47 of them had an L1 of Chinese, which was the most significant, followed by Korean, Spanish, Russian, Portuguese, Persian, or other. All right. For our second research question, we looked at a subgroup of 12 participants out of the 154. These participants were the ones who used the ear device. For the sake of this presentation, we're just going to consider 4 of these participants. So the 4 that we are looking at is participant 1001, whose L1 was Korean and was enrolled in ESL courses. Participant 1003, whose L1 was Chinese and was a graduate student. Participant 1006, whose L1 was Chinese and was an undergraduate student. And lastly, participant 1009, whose L1 was Korean and was a graduate student. Okay. Okay, so the first measurement that we're going to look at is the subjective measurement, which was the language engagement log. This was a daily log divided into 1-hour time blocks. It was logged for 21 hours from 6 a.m. to 3 a.m. And from the list as seen to the right, participants chose from 6 options: speaking, writing, reading, or listening in English, using other language, L1 or L3, or no language use at all. And then this was logged 5 weekdays throughout the spring semester of 2019. And for our objective measure, we use the ear device. I want to emphasize that this solely recorded productive measures, productive use. So speaking or listening, it didn't record receptive writing or reading. So this electronically recorded spoken interaction from 6 a.m. to 2 a.m. in 30-second sound clips. And then these were captured in 12-minute intervals. So the participants wore the ear device in an armband as seen to the right. And if it wasn't worn in the armband, it was placed within vicinity to capture interaction. And it was worn one day in December of 2019. And in order to triangulate our ear data, the LEL was also used at the time of the recording. Okay, and then when recording the ear data, we uploaded it to an Excel sheet and first identified based on participant ID, date, timestamp, and there were about 90 to 95 timestamps per participant. And then we analyzed form of engagement. So speaking and listening in the L1 or L3, speaking in the L2 or English, listening in the L2 or no language at all. And at this point, I will hand it back over to Dr. Kim for the results.
Thank you, Francis. So to remind everyone about the research question, the first research question was, how much language engagement do our international students actually have? Again, most of the students were degree-seeking students. and they were studying in the United States, one of the institutions in the United States. So you can see it on the right-hand side, a pie chart, which is the language exposure during a 24-hour day. And you could, first I would like to note that our international students on average as a group level, they reported that they were using their native or other languages 15% of a 24-hour segment. So that would equal to 4 hours a day. And the second point was they were using 45% of the day with not using any languages. So that would equal to 11 hours. But we need to keep in mind that our 24 hours includes the time that we are asleep. So if we exclude that average recommended hours of 7 hours of sleep, that will equal to 4 hours of no language use while they are awake. And last, most importantly, we were interested in, as a group level, how much do our international students use ELG2? In this case, it was English. And we found that 36% of the time they were using English, which translates into 9 hours. If we break that up into productive and receptive skills, we were able to find that they were using receptive skills more for about 5 hours, and they were using productive skills for about 4 hours, with speaking 2.6 hours and writing 1.3 hours. But again, I've mentioned this several times that this data is a group level data. So in order to see how much individual variations there are, we need to look into individual data. And one way to do this is by looking into the line graphs. So on the right-hand side is a line graph of all our international students, language, especially English engagement from 6 a.m. to 3 a.m. What you could immediately notice here is that there are very different, first of all, and you could see the line graphs that are circled by the blue lines are the ones that had a lot of engagement with English throughout the entire day. But the graphs that are shaped by the red lines are the ones who actually do not use English that often. If we look at the actual hours or the minutes of these two groups of students, we could see that participant number 47, for instance, he was using English only 36 minutes a day. Whereas students who were reporting a lot of language use, it was up to 18 hours and 30 minutes. So it's very important to note that, yes, we see that on a group level, students are using ELG2 quite a lot. But if you look at the individuals' actual use, there are a lot of individual variations, which is normal, which I would think. So to remind everyone of research question 2, it was about to what extent do the results from the subjective language engagement questionnaire align with the objective language engagement measures. So to give you a heads up about the results, before I look into specific data, we were able to find that for both LEL and ear device, that our 4 participants reported not using language the most, and comparable use of English and L1 and L3 use. Again, we also saw a wide range of individual variations, even with the ear device. And we also saw that when it comes to alignment with LEL and ear device, there are again a lot of variation across participants, which range from 2% to 23% of misalignment between these two measures. So let's take a closer look into the data. So this is participant 1001 and the data from the ear device, which is the objective measure. You could immediately see that there is a lot of portion that is colored in green, which represents no language. Again, in the ear device, it only captures the productive skills skills. So in this no language, it also includes reading and writing. Oops, sorry. Looking at 1003, quite very similar patterns. You can see that the majority of the pie chart is no language use. Now looking at the LEL, which is the subjective measure, you could see that, oh, the green part is actually quite a lot, which is 77%, which aligns quite well with the ear device. With 1003, it was 57%, which is still okay. It's the ear device was 66%. But if we actually translate this into hours, we could see that our participant 1001, she underestimated 18 minutes of using L1 and L3 in the subjective measures, but she overestimated using English more in her subjective measure about for 1 hour and 24 minutes. The discrepancy is a little bit larger for 1003 participants with the difference between 2 hours and 48 minutes to 3 hours and 30 minutes. I'm just gonna check I'm doing with time. Okay, I'm gonna rush a little bit. For 1006 and 1009, we could see that the discrepancies are becoming wider. Okay. Moving on to the discussion. So what does this all mean? So I wanted to look into, again, how much our international students are actually using different types of languages. And we were able to find that at a group level, students were engaged with L2 nearly 2.2 times more than their L1 every day. This is very similar to the results reported in Ranta and Mecklenburg with 17 Chinese graduate students, but different from Dewey et al., Fried et al., because mostly I think that student profiles in their studies were college exchange students, whereas us, it was degree seeking students. But it's very important to note that there were a lot of individual variation when it came to the quantity of L2 engagement. So what this means is that although all the students had equal amount of affordances to use L2 in an emerged context, it does not mean that they actually use the same amount of L2. Last slide. Summary of the triangulation data. Students tend to overestimate the amount of language engagement, especially when it comes to English. The numbers were ranged quite widely from 18 minutes to 5 hours and 30 minutes. But importantly, also individuals, there were a lot of individual differences. So for instance, participant number 1001, she only overestimated 1 hour and 40 minutes, whereas 1009, he or she overestimated about 8 hours and 30 minutes. So it's very important to see that we need more triangulation of subjective measures that are very much overwhelmingly used in our research with actual objective measures. Okay. Thank you so much. This research was funded by the following agencies, and I would like to shout out that it was Frances' first presentation as a graduate student. So I want to give her a big hand for the good work that she has done.
Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you for your great presentation and sharing your wonderful research with us, Kathy and Frances. Our third and last presenter is Nadine Nassef or Nassif. Please correct my pronunciation if needed. From the Misr International University. The title of the presentation is The Psychology of a Language Learner, the Outturn of Self-Motivation on a Learner's Linguistic Self-Competence.
Thank you, Katie. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, everyone, amazing presentation so far. Wow. It's Nadine Nassef, actually, Middle Eastern and all. Okay, I will be sharing my screen right away. Just give me a second.
Take your time and thank you.
Thank you. So can everyone see my screen? Perfect. Perfect. Okay. Okay, hello everyone. I really hope you're all safe and sound. First things first, I'm really beyond honored to be part of this amazing conference so far. I'm really honored to be with you all today. And the presentations are amazing so far. God bless everyone. So it's Nadine Nosif here. I'm a university teaching assistant in the Department of English Language, Linguistics, and Literature at Misr International University in Egypt. And my topic here is a very introductory one in my research. It's about the psychology of a language learner. I've been very interested in this topic and how we motivate one another and how each learner's psyche is different from the other and, individual differences and all. And my focus here is the outturn of self-motivation on a learner's linguistic self-confidence and, of course, self-confidence in return. So what I've been thinking before actually going through the entire research back in fall 2020, I started actually asking myself, can you motivate yourself? Is it even possible? Can you do it yourself, or does it have to be extrinsic motivation? Do you have to be forced by some kind of motivation, some outer force, someone outside your circle? Do you have to challenge yourself? So these were some very informal questions that were hovering over my thoughts before I even think of this study. And then we delved into COVID. So it made me actually think what actually counts as motivation and success in a COVID semester, or since we're in April 2021, may I say year so far? And this diagram grabbed my attention that every type of motivation, which is pure science, actually is applicable, whether extrinsic, whether intrinsic, integrative, the different types of motivation, the pure science that we study, and mainly self-motivation, which you created yourself, no matter what outer forces tell you not to do something. So here, to cut a very long story short, my research is basically applied on certain aspects concerning the what, why, and how of self-motivation. It was basically an empirical study and actually a conceptual study at the same time. So let me just define what is self-motivation. For starters, it is basically the ability to drive oneself to take an initiative or action to pursue your own goals and complete your tasks. So overall, it is an inner drive for you, yourself, to take an action, to create and achieve everything by yourself. It's what pushes you to keep going with tasks, especially the ones you're pursuing because you want to, not because someone else told you to. So everything is, you're the one in charge. Everything is on your own. So to delve into my research paper, what drove me to start this research or to actually, take my own initiative and motivate myself to do this research was that people always quote, "We're all the same," in a very informal context. We're all the same. Everybody needs to be motivated. So you would never actually force yourself to do something unless someone else tells you to, or unless you are restricted by a deadline. And everyone knows what a deadline means, since I think we're all grad students here, or PhD or postdocs. So we're all restricted by our deadlines, and we're always like, we have zero motivation at all, especially in the COVID era. So I thought, is this really the case? My paper here is actually based on the essence of motivation and self-motivation as a catalyst to enrich the self-confidence and the linguistic community through Egyptian students. So the keywords for the paper are language acquisition, language learning, the willingness to communicate, and that's mainly what I will focus on, or what is abbreviated into WTC, and of course, motivation, self-motivation, L2 self-confidence, L2 self-confidence, and linguistic motivation. Very briefly, my abstract was enforcing the idea that it was worth examining to what extent the learners engage with others to see if this even reveals their motivation in the process of communication, mainly to express the connection between the theoretical foundation or the perspectives. So this paper attempted to explain the differences and the significance that learners' self-motivation has on their linguistic self-confidence. And of course, you have to link self-confidence to self-confidence. If you're not confident, you would never, ever be competent in any life aspect. The main research questions here were, what are the most common ways to enhance self-motivation in second language learning? And to what extent does self-motivation outweigh extrinsic motivation in second language learning? The methodology here is actually, or was, a mixed methods research. It was triangulation between both quantitative data and qualitative data. All the participants were Egyptian students. They were 50 undergrad university students. I did 25 freshman students and 25 graduating senior students within the age of 18 to 23. This range, just to understand the difference between their university level, will it actually have any impact on the way they think or the way they motivate themselves, the way they perceive what motivation is? They were all attending their bachelor's degree levels at Mr. International University, where I worked there and I was their instructor at that time. They were all attending academic English courses as one of the requirements of their final graduation. As I just said, I was their instructor, and therefore I asked for their consent to be part of my study and asked them if they understood in the first place what the concept of self-motivation is, and if it actually has real effect on their motivation and their linguistic self-confidence. So they were very, very welcoming to the idea, and they told me that some people understood that there is a term that is entitled to self-motivation. Some others didn't even believe in motivation, and that made me laugh actually. Some others told me it's neutral. We'll just see through the questionnaire that I will conduct with them or administer to them. So they filled a questionnaire which consisted of 10 questions on a Likert scale, where number 1 is the lowest and number 7 is the highest, along with 3 open-ended questions, just for me to gain more insight about their motivation in general and give them more space, to make them speak up, have a voice, and actually tell me what they feel, not just to feel restricted by some kind of choices or, you have to answer this or that. And the 3 main questions were, number 1, how would you assess yourself and your own English oral competence? Do you feel you have the needed competence to interact on a given topic? Do you feel comfortable speaking in front of the whole class? Number 2, do you think your classmates help you in developing your English competence? And the 3rd one is, to what extent do you think self-motivation, between inverted commas, is significant when it comes to learning English? And please bear in mind that my participants are all Egyptian students, where the L1 is Arabic in my case. And in Egypt, or mainly in the Middle East, the way English is pronounced is not exactly the way English is supposed to be pronounced. And that differs, and it's very relative on every country or in every university, but it's all has to do with how you were acquired the language, how you were learned, how you were taught, how you taught yourself how to speak, or your teachers taught you back when you were a kid. So not every, variety or dialect was pronounced exactly the same. So there are always questions about how this word or this letter should be pronounced in English. Is it American English, Canadian, British, Australian? And they always have to just to compare between different languages. They do not even understand there is a difference between a dialect and a variety. It's like an entirely different language. I hope you get my point. The American English and the British English. They perceive it as different languages. So before going on with the entire questionnaire, I decided to pilot it first, just to understand that we are on the same page and to make sure that they give me full consent. They are not, they are not forced by any means. They're not obliged to do that. So a couple of questions were piloted among 10 students. I asked them to volunteer, whoever wants to actually be part of this pilot study. So 5 freshman students, and also I made sure that it has to be 5 graduating senior students as their counterparts before to go through with the entire questionnaire. And luckily, they loved the idea of being self-motivated and they wanted to continue with the rest of the questions. And they told their friends that this study is, it's different for them. At least that's what they told me, or how I'm quoting them. So the final questionnaire was administered at the end of a class session. I told them that they will have 20 minutes to fill out the questionnaire, and it was made very clear that their participation in the study would never influence their final evaluation of my course, and that this questionnaire would be treated anonymously. So accordingly, it was optional to write their names. I know that I am restricted by time, so I'll try to wrap up everything very quickly. Okay. So actually, regarding the discussion, very briefly, the results have indicated that fear is essential when it comes to increasing the linguistic self-confidence. And at the same time, some other, I'm sorry, just give me 1 second. I think my screen. Okay, sorry. So yeah, some of the results, or most of them to be accurate, have indicated that fear is essential when it comes to increasing your linguistic self-confidence. However, you have to take over such fear by actually visualizing the end results of reaching where you want to be. And some findings also indicated the need for extrinsic motivation. A lot of others told me that there has to be a need for a challenging environment to motivate yourself. And surprisingly enough, that was not the case for the other selected participants. So it's more about balance, and I need to start digging more into this topic. As I said at the very beginning, that this is only like the start of this research. So to synopsize the study so far, I will actually wrap them up in this slide. The final framework, which could be explained based on the results, consists of 4 main dimensions so far. Number 1, creating the basic motivational conditions for oneself. Number 2, generating initial motivation. Number 3 is maintaining and protecting your motivation. And the 4th one is to encourage your positive retrospective self-evaluation. So an overall conclusion would be that the concept of self-motivation in determining the second language, the learning process, and your own linguistic self-confidence is here to illuminate or shine how second language learners come to master the English language and how they are socialized through language into local values, beliefs, theories, and conceptions of it, rather than actually be under the impact of their L1, which is Arabic in my first case. And Dr. Jen, I believe that world Englishes are to be celebrated as well. This is exactly what I feel. That's why I've been trying to tell them that, people, please, guys, there are a lot of different dialects for any language. You do not have to prioritize some language or some dialect or variety over the other. Every country or every community has their own language that they speak. I hope they would understand this. I really hope so. I am almost done. I've been trying to put it all very briefly. And of course, I'm planning on digging more into this topic because it was a very small sample. I'm planning to expand to an even international sample, or at least in the Middle East in the upcoming years. Because so far, a multitude of conclusions could be drawn from the results of this study, which happened in fall 2020, which could actually enjoy the interest of further researchers and, of course, experts in the SLA field, as well as EFL or ASL professors or instructors. And actually, in light of this present study, so far, what I have actually gathered, or what I have reached, that self-motivation, it does contribute to a huge extent, although a lot of others believe that this concept does not even exist. However, it's like 60% of my sample told me that it does contribute to a huge extent, and they would actually overcome the fear that I mentioned earlier by visualizing what they want instead. They would actually create what they want and do it themselves. And that it actually helps with the different contributions to the L2 willingness to communicate. And of course, the very last slide, when you compare your learners' WTC or their willingness to communicate in L2, this is actually a new way to give space for yourself as a researcher or as a professor or instructor, and for other research studies to flesh out and come to life. And that's exactly what happened with me, or what is happening with me right now, because I want to adopt a more qualitative approach to self-motivation and the WTC. Because actually, again, further studies would investigate other factors influencing their WTC more and more, and on a different sample or a wider sample to be more accurate, just to prepare the ideal linguistic self to emerge later on. And these were the main 3 references that I used for this study. It's a very introductory study, and I'm planning to delve more into it. And thank you very much. I would be very honored if you have any thoughts or ideas on self-motivation, or you practice these with your students or colleagues. And please, you can shoot them to me via email, because it would really help here at my email. It's very, very beneficial. And again, thank you very much. I'm beyond honored to be here with you all today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nadine.
You're very welcome.
Jennifer, Kathy, Francis, and Nadine, thank you again for your presentations. This was amazing. I know I got research envy just listening to everybody else. It's all very fascinating. Unfortunately, we're out of time for the Q&A. I can leave the room open for a couple more minutes if anybody wants to hang back and pose any questions. If not, you can actually post questions on the Whova page. You'll see a space where you can do that if you have any questions for any of our presenters today. But it is time for us to close the session. And I want to thank everybody for attending. And we have some friendly reminders just for throughout the day. Our first keynote speaker is going to, Dr. Malone, is going to start her talk at 11 a.m., which is in just a few minutes. And our second keynote speech is going to start at 1:45. And the abstracts and breakout room numbers for poster presentations are available when you click exhibitor on the left side of our Whova page. And we also have a virtual happy hour starting at 6:15 if you would like to come. And you can go to the agenda tab and click by clicking on community on the left side of the event. So we hope to see you around in another session soon. Thank you, everyone.